Now, HR is always playing mind games with you. They speak in a lot of double speak where they say one thing but mean another. And when you're playing these mind games with them, you have to understand, are you prepared to win? Can you kind of really see through all those mental gymnastics and really navigate through them? So let's learn through, firstly, some of the tension that exists between yourself as a worker and HR.
The success of any business hinges on a group with diametrically opposed motivations to the owners. As an employee, you want to be paid a lot of money, but your company wants to pay you as little as it can. As an employee, you want to work flexible hours, but your company wants you to be available at all times just in case something comes up. And as an employee, you want to work in a comfortable working environment, but your company wants everybody to give up working from home to come into open plan offices that are cheaper than giving people space and privacy. Back before World War I, the opposition between employers and employees was not kept a secret. The new industrialists demanded long hours in dangerous factories, and the workers pushed back through organized and often violent strikes. The industrialists still had the upper hand, because they could easily hire able-bodied men from farm work that paid less. After, the war skills became more important, and just being able-bodied was not enough to work in the most mechanized factories in the early 20th century. Skilled labor unions were gaining the upper hand.
So if we just consider this, right? So essentially, the first point of tension is around money, right? Money, time, flexibility. And in the sense that, many unions, they wanted to give people a lot more power. A lot of major industrialists at the time, we can say corporate business owners now, CEOs, shareholders and things like that. They put a lot of pressure on you as an individual to kind of accept these unfair terms of service. And that's why there is a lot of parallels between a master-slave dynamic, being in an authoritarian dictatorship when you are working in these type of corporate jobs. And they try to fool you that, the social status of the job titles, and think you should be grateful for the opportunity, when it's really a two-way contract. You're not just a slave in that dynamic, even though they have a lot of leverage. You kind of are agreeing to something that they have to fulfill their end of it too. But because they're so vague with some of their company policies, with the contract and the leverage that they have, they effectively try to treat you like a slave. So that's the first thing to look out for, is the level of leverage they have and how you can, in certain cases, depending on how you deal with things, try to swing that as best as you can in your favor. So the first thing is understanding that dynamic. And when you start a job, be careful when you read the job contract, to what extent can you take sick leave? On what circumstances can you leave? How much notice do you need to give them? Are there any loopholes you could exploit? Understand their kind of general corporate culture when you do join, right? Because HR, they might have all these rules, and find out what rules work for you. So for example, some companies, they say, on Friday, people can leave early in the mid-afternoon, and then you might be able to negotiate that and say, well, I'm happy to work the full day on Friday. Can I get an early half day on Thursday, for example, if you have a family event, if you have some other kind of interests? Figure out all the kind of weak spots, all the little loopholes that you can exploit that can work for you. If there's a team member that's constantly coming in late in the morning because they're dropping off their kids at school, I'm not saying you can always do this, but you can maybe negotiate, well, after a few months into the job, just say, I have a nephew and my family members, they can't take them to work on those 2 days, Monday and Tuesday. Can I drop them off at school? They don't know if you have a nephew or not, and you probably don't have to provide evidence for that. But if they've given flexible working for someone else, they should be able to give flexible working for you, because you're on the same team doing the same type of work. So try to figure out those type of loopholes that work for you, because in the past, as you can see, people do these protests, but people, because of a more individualistic society, you don't really have this kind of group action as much. You got to work as an individual to find any little bit of leverage you can find.
The industrialists needed a new approach to ensure that they could keep getting the most out of their workers, and so human resources was born. The first HR department was formed in 1901 by the National Cash Register Company. They called it the Personnel Management Department, and it was formed in response to several organized staff walkouts and strikes over working conditions and pay. The National Cash Register Company employed workers skilled in arithmetic to keep books for regional banks before electronic computers. The people working on the floor of this business were actually called computers. That was their job title. The automated adding machines that came later would be named after them. But that's a story for how history works. The new Personnel Management Department was established to do three things. 1. Train management on new workplace laws and policies. 2. Handle hiring and firing of workers. And 3. Mediate workplace grievances between employees and managers. What the company had done was privatize the labor union and bring it directly under their control, while making it appear as if they were doing this all for the good of their employees. Because the National Cash Register Company employed skilled workers that were hard to train and replace, their new personnel management department made sense to be the new prototype HR department. But 120 years later, nothing has changed. When Starbucks, Amazon, and Walmart fight against worker unionization, they say that a union will just get in the way of working directly with the company to resolve worker grievances.
We have workers' councils, of course, and we have very good communications with our employees. So we don't believe that we need a union to be an intermediary between us and our employees. But of course, at the end of the day, it's always the employee's choice.
No matter how they
So looking at Bezos here, so a couple key points. So the second thing is that I wanted to mention was around HR and the history of HR, right? It's always been about control. You can see here the kind of white female liberal, which you see in modern culture now around career woman, girl bossing type of things. Their kind of power dynamic in the workplace started with the HR. Right, with the whole Karen type of meme, it really does go back a lot further than just the recent incidents we've seen with meme culture and things like that. And the third point is around, next couple points actually, is around what was the purpose of HR. Firstly, it was around training or organizing the training for employees. But in reality, how does that work? I mean, I've been at many companies, and in many instances, the training wasn't great. And sometimes in this weird world, sometimes people, team members who might be training you, they want to put in the bare minimum effort, not give you little hints and tips, or not give you detailed training because they might see you as competition, and they might be deliberately unhelpful, or they provide you the bare minimum training so they can just tick a box and say they've done it, even if you don't really understand what's going on. So that's an interesting perspective. And then it says also HR involved in hiring and firing, right? And what does this mean? It's not just the manual process of filling in a form on a work system that you've been hired as a new employee or you've been fired. It's all about constructing narratives, feeding into how to be very strategic if a manager wants to fire you, how to log your performance reviews in a way that's positive or negative depending on what their goal is in the end of the day for you, because they can construct any narrative they want. Putting you up for a performance improvement plan, a PIP, if they want to fire you without giving you a layoff package. So there's all this type of double speak you have to look out for, right? Which is, HR are responsible for hiring and terminating employees. But there's a lot more to it than that. HR work with managers to construct narratives, and that's very important. I know instances where, and this is a red flag for you to look out for. If you get feedback in one annual performance review, and then you do something to make those changes, but then in the second performance review, an annual review a year later, they say, oh, well, we pointed these things out last year and you're still making the same mistakes, or you haven't corrected these things. That's them sort of justifying, we're not going to give you a good bonus, we think you're not making improvements, you might be up for a layoff in the future, or restructuring, things like that, however they want to word it. But essentially, they can manufacture any narrative they want. That's why you should always document things. And every time you get a performance review, some performance feedback in writing specifically, you're able to document how you've met those particular requirements. So say, for example, they say, we need you to be more of a team player in your one performance review before it reaches the next year where they repeat it and then justify it not as a reason not to give you a good bonus. Just make a note throughout the year of all the instances you are a team player, right? So in writing for your own reference, and you can mention it in your performance review, mention it to your managers throughout the year, how you're meeting those requirements. The funny thing is, even at the end of that case, they might say, oh, well, you haven't done enough to be a team player, right? Even if you've documented all these instances, because they, again, have the power to construct the narrative against you. But at least you protected yourself. And if you're in a dispute with the employer, your manager, and the HR gets involved, or it becomes a legal issue, at least you've got all this documentation justifying your perspective. So always keep a track of, and keep your own notepad, your own record in your phone of what's going on throughout your schedule. And then bring on to point number 5. Like I say, when it comes to managers and employees and resolving those disputes, HR, of course, are going to be on the favorite side. They're going to favor the manager over you, favor the company over you. And even when it comes to, if you're having records, like I mentioned before, having doctor's notes around mental health issues, being able to document unfair treatment, perhaps on the basis of race or gender. There's this thing where they can essentially justify what they want to, however they want to justify things. Even if they lack evidence for the performance issues they're flagging for you, they can just say, well, this is what we're flagging for you as a real performance issue. And it kind of doesn't matter whether they have the evidence or not, because they can construct a narrative. Interesting case when it comes to Bezos here, right? So Bezos's body language is kind of shifting, his awkward shoulder movement, avoiding eye contact, things like that. He knows his kind of deliberately have a dynamic with his employees where there's not a union that's kind of helping them, that they have a lot of power of their employees, and that they can avoid lawsuits through this type of kind of predatory dynamic, authoritarian type of dictatorship that you do see in major corporations. Then when it comes to HR, now HR working for a company, that's exactly what they do, and they want you to be a cheap employee, they want you to work hard, and they don't want you to complain. So whoever's willing to accept a low salary, work themselves to the bone, and have a high work ethic and no complaining, right? So low pay, high work ethic, and no complaining. And those are the people that typically do well, that get trashed on and treated like trash, rather than people uniting to negotiate better work conditions for themselves. So it's kind of like exploitation. They're exploiting you, smiling in your face, exploiting you, and stabbing you in the back when it's convenient for them, right? That's why you see a layoff, even if you work hard for a company, or all of a sudden they construct a narrative that you're not good at the job. So you've got to look out for these type of things, because they'll have no problem, like I say, stabbing you in the back, but you've got to play fair with them. So there's one set of rules for you and another set of rules for them.
Half, a workplace analytics firm, found that managers actually favored applicants that asked for salaries that were higher but still reasonable. If you are willing to accept any offer, you will be seen as desperate or unqualified for the job that is on offer. Where if you negotiate hard, you are not only showing that you think you are good enough for the job on offer, you are also showing that you can be assertive and confident in a high-pressure situation. A company always wants to pay its employees as little as it can, but hiring managers in human resources departments that handle onboarding and salary negotiations are not the same as the company. They have their own motivations too.
What we have on our screen right now. So firstly, we have all these particular instances. What are the roles of compliance? What is their incentives? Legal and compliance, they don't want you to be a reputational risk to their firm. So things like your social media should be clean when they do search your name. And I know HR and recruiters, if you're reaching out to a recruiter to put you in touch with good opportunities, first thing they do is they Google your name, find out any dirt they have. And I remember that happened to me one time many years ago, where they Googled my name and they couldn't find anything. And it's because I don't keep a Facebook and things like that, because I just think it's pointless. And they were like, we find it a bit suspicious. You don't have any kind of online profile of anything apart from your LinkedIn. I said, yeah, I just don't like social media. And this is what I mean. They really are checking all these things you think they wouldn't. So that's legal and compliance type of risks. But what's interesting is how this system works and how it can construct any narrative it wants. I remember working for a major investment bank where they hired an employee, they hired a trader who had a very bad reputation at another company. His name had been logged with the regulator themselves, the financial regulator, as perhaps doing manipulative trading. But it wasn't enough to constitute a legal issue or for him to be fired. But essentially, there's a lot of suspicious circumstances surrounding him, and he came across a bit of a suspicious character. But because the manager really wanted to hire him, and HR kind of overlooked that, there's many other cases of salespeople I've worked with who have essentially had GBH, which would be like assault charges on them, male and female who've done assault charges. But because they're the son of a hedge fund manager, which is a major client of an investment bank, or there's a woman who has a connection at the investment bank, they'll overlook that. And there really is so many double standards there. But like I say, if they can manufacture any narrative, oh, that was a long time ago, you're not like that now. I don't know, it's very suspicious, some of these circumstances. And when it comes to company culture, they want you to play along with the DEI agenda, whatever the latest agenda is. Typically it's diversity, now it's ESG, are you very pro-climate activism, things like that. Budget, of course, they want you to have a low pay. Stock compensation programs, depending on how you look at that. Some people want the money up front. Some people don't mind receiving some of their bonuses in stock over the long term. And then talent retention. Now, this is what they might do to play mind games with you, to convince you that, oh, if you work hard for this low pay, we'll give you a promotion soon enough and you'll become the next vice president of this team, next director. It's just really a lot of mind games to keep you participating in a system that's kind of rigged against you. Now, what's interesting here is the statistics at the bottom of the page, which was a recruitment company who did some kind of survey. It says when hiring staff, 70% of managers expect the candidate to negotiate the salary. So that's what I'd recommend you do. No matter what salary they put up front, always be willing to negotiate it. Find out the market rate, justify the experience you bring from other companies to that company. And because they're always going to lie. I remember one lie I could definitely tell with a HR recruitment contact at a major investment bank when I was moving from one to the next. I was saying, okay, well, I've got this other job offer. Are you able to offer me more? And they said, well, we can't offer you more. The best we can do is match what you've got from that other company. And, I was really aggressive in terms of pushing for extra pay, saying that, I have a lot of experience for other top competitor banks. And they were trying to say, oh, well, it's at the top end of what we'll offer for this particular level in the company. And I didn't really believe him. And when I was speaking with him, I kind of didn't buy his lies. You know what I mean? And sometimes this is what happens. You've got these people who, I don't know, they're lying to your face so openly. That's why I wouldn't take HR too seriously. I wouldn't really have much respect for them sometimes when you're in these negotiations. But definitely negotiate your salary. Find out, there's many different surveys and recruitment companies that put out data like this. So what is the average salary for this particular role in this city? And if it's drastically lower than what's being offered, just say, well, I got paid at my last company. I have 5-10 years experience. This is the market rate depending on the recruitment company that is specific to your niche. So some recruitment companies like Robert Half, Hayes, companies like that, Morgan McKinley, they're more focused on the finance industry and they have these specific reports. So if the salary is way off what's being surveyed in the market, you should flag that when you are negotiating. 62% are more open to negotiating salary than a year ago. So I'm not sure when this actually came out. I think it was just before the whole lockdown situation, right? So it depends on where the market is. Now, obviously, we're in a market where there are a lot of layoffs and people will probably be willing to take any job they can get. They're not going to be negotiating the salary too hard. But I definitely think there should be some negotiation there. Even if you're in a difficult position, you just lost your job, you can negotiate salary without being too aggressive or disrespectful, right? And you can have a back and forth there and continue your job interviews at other companies in the meantime, so you're not just dependent on this one thing working out, and then you feel like you're in a stronger negotiating position. And of course, when it comes to pay, when it comes to any income source, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. And that's very important to realize. So every time you see that someone else is getting a lot more pay than you, or you hear that maybe contract workers, of course, they might be getting more pay than the standard workers, it's because they're in a position where they can negotiate that. It's not necessarily that they deserve that or that they're super skilled. You see this with negotiations through music contracts in the music industry, any industry. It's all about what you can negotiate by justifying what value you bring, which can be a bit of a grey area, but it's something you should focus on. And then when it comes to 59% of managers who are more open to negotiating non-monetary perks and benefits than a year ago. And this is something I definitely recommend you consider. So if you're negotiating salary and they're not too flexible on that, then say, if I was going to take this role at this particular salary level, which was lower than I intended, is there any other flexibility I could have? Maybe I could have 2 days work from home each week, and could I get that added to my job contract? What type of flexible working do you offer? If you maybe have family, you're looking for health insurance, can they offer you some kind of discount on a family health insurance plan? I know some of these things are less likely, but now, particularly when it comes to work from home, there is a lot of optionality there to negotiate that if you do have a good, strong skill set. So always be open to that. The same way the company is always going to have more leverage than you do. But any little small battles you can win, you can't win the war because they're going to hire you and fire you whenever they want and construct any narrative that supports that. But any little battle you can win in a tactful, polite way, playing the kind of corporate passive-aggressive negotiation game, that can really work out for you. And like I say, working from home is a great advantage, a great negotiating tactic that you could get if they're not going to budge on pay. And this kind of brings me on to like my 6th point in general, right? So the motivation is completely different. And this is what I mean by you and the company being at odd ends. They want to pay you less. That's their motivation. And you want to earn more. So that's your motivation. So you're going to have these type of slight challenges there. And also when it comes to dealing with these different type of instances, I just want to briefly go back to this particular thing when it comes about company culture and when it also comes about talent retention. So company culture and talent retention, there is a link there. Now, firstly, when it comes to company culture, what they want to do is offer you some kind of benefits, which could be, free food, free drinks, company discounts, team events. And what they want to do is see how eagerly you pursue some of those, particularly when it comes to those team events and things like that. And the more brainwashed you can pretend to be, the more they value you. The more red-pilled, the more strong boundaries you have, the more fringe opinions you might mention, or lack of willingness even simply to participate in some of these events, the more they'll see you as a red flag, the more they'll resent you and devalue you. HR will pick up on some things that maybe you're not attending those team events after work, or your manager will. That'll be a red flag that, oh, this guy, he's not fooled by this HR mess. He's not fooled by this brainwashing that everyone else seems to be eager to participate in, or at least pretend to play along with. So that's something to bear in mind. A lot of the things around company culture and being a team player have nothing to do with being a productive worker. It's all to do with basically mimicking the role of a slave in these type of corporate environments. And then when it comes to talent retention, there's lots of social dynamics to be aware of in the team. There's always a clique, right? There's an inner and an outer circle. And if you're in the inner circle, one of the manager's favorites, popular in the company, you're more likely to get promoted and have greater job stability. If you're an outer circle and you're not playing the social game, then you're not likely to be retained in the company. So that's another kind of HR game to look out for. As much as they'll portray everything as being based on performance or competency, a lot of it is about this type of social dynamic, right? And that's why these companies, they tend to prefer people who are more average and more loyal, rather than people who are more skilled and more eager to pursue their self-interest in the sense of higher pay.
Next reason is plain and simple bad managers who want to qualify a candidate, then see if they would be a good fit for the role, and then negotiate salary all in separate interviews. It's the beginner's guide to outdated business power moves. All of these discussions can be had in one interview and some follow-up phone calls. The second reason that hiring managers have kept adding more interviews to the hiring process is because multiple rounds of interviews are a useful way of safely getting rid of applicants that HR or the hiring manager doesn't like. In 4 rounds of interviews, a practical assignment, and a screening quiz, there will always be something to justify picking one candidate over another, so the company and its managers can protect themselves against accusations of discrimination. For example, if someone shows up to a job interview heavily pregnant and talks about how they can't wait to be a stay-at-home mom, an employer can't not hire them based on that information alone, because that would be discrimination against a protected class of people. If the employer doesn't want to hire someone that is only going to work for 2 months before quitting to raise a child, they can just use any other data point from the extended application process to show that they were a weaker candidate than someone else.
So it's very important to pay attention to these type of things when it comes to the hiring practices, the DEI discrimination lawsuits, and never say anything, of course, in interviews that could give them a reason not to hire you, right? Play along with the charade. They're lying to you. You can lie to them as much as you can get away with effectively. So, for example, if you are a woman who's considering having kids, just don't mention it, right? Work for the company for several months or a year, and even if you were already pregnant, until it becomes obvious, don't mention it to them until you've got the job contract and you're aware of all the maternity leave and the additional support they may give you, right? Some companies are quite good in the sense that they give you some paid childcare. They might have a big office and they have a nursery within the massive corporate building. Like some companies, I think like Goldman Sachs, they have their own kind of nursery for kids, daycare service, and you might get some additional discounts to use that service. So just bear in mind, once you're joining a company, you're aware of all the benefits that they offer to you, but don't mention anything, of course, like that when you're in the interview stage. And they do all these type of tactics around, DEI discrimination lawsuits and things like that. There's some companies I worked at where I've been kind of suspicious, whereby several weeks will go by and then they'll give me a second or third round interview, and I think, why is that? And then they'll reject me like immediately after that. And I wonder if they did that because they didn't want me to flag any type of discrimination issue or suspicious type of approach they were taking with some of the questions they were asking me in the interview. There's all these type of instances that really do come to mind, and you develop a sixth sense for that over time, all the HR mind games, time delays, things like that. Now, when it comes to keeping you jumping through hoops, jumping over hurdles, things like that throughout these interviews, be aware of what's going on here. Try to read in between the lines, and you can ask them directly, how many interviews there are there, when do you think you'll come to a conclusion in terms of offering a job, whoever the candidate would be, myself or someone else. And the thing is, you never want to give the impression of desperation when you're dealing with HR. You're always going to be playing a game where you're reading between the lines. You don't want to snap on them and be aggressive, because they're allowed to be passive aggressive with you, but you can't be aggressive or assertive with them, right? And the other thing I wanted to say is around understanding how they waste your time. They're talking about having many interviews here in this clip we just seen. They could really do it in, I would say, maximum 3 interviews. 1 HR screening, 1 with your manager and maybe a fellow team member, and maybe a 3rd interview to negotiate the salary, or maybe have a final interview with another senior manager contact. And that's how they could do it. But there's lots of time delays, manipulation, always saying that they have another candidate that is better. Is that really the case? What's actually going on here? And they're not going to say to your face, of course, maybe they don't want to hire you based on your gender, your race, your culture being different in some way, shape or form, or one little thing you said that ticked them off in terms of their personality types. And I remember, I'll give you 2 instances. I remember several years ago interviewing at one of the big 4 accounting firms or consultancy firms. And I mentioned how I was quite interested in crypto and I was kind of ahead of the curve in terms of understanding certain things. And then they rejected me. And the feedback I got from the recruiter is they said, oh, they didn't like the way I was talking. They said that I didn't have the best soft skills for the role on the basis that I was kind of very interested and eager around crypto, and my wording sounded like I was a bit full of myself, something like that. That was the feedback from the recruiter. And this is what I mean. It's like there's so many little things that can tick them off. I remember in another interview, a manager had asked me, the hiring manager was asking me, also, where do you see yourself after you've been in this role for 3 or 4 years? I said, oh, I want to continue to develop expertise in this particular area of trading and managing the risk around that. And then over time, I could either, depending on the circumstances, I could either look into another area, say I'm looking at credit trading right now, focus on foreign exchange trading, and or maybe be in a senior role and overlooking team members who are managing some of these risks. I can also have an interest in like commodities, like physical gold and things like that. And then, I don't know, he reacted kind of negatively. And the feedback from the recruiter in that instance was that they didn't like that I sounded like I was being too focused that, oh, I would immediately get a promotion and be at a more senior level. And I wasn't even implying that. He asked me where I'd be after 2 or 3 years in the role. I was just saying giving some different options. And anyone who works a career out there, you know how unpredictable things are, especially these days. You know, you never know if you're going to get promoted, get a layoff, where you'd be working in one particular area, focus on one specialization, and then all of a sudden you're looking at another particular aspect of your industry or trading. Like I say, going from covering equities to commodities, it depends on what the team needs, where there's a demand in the team. If there's a shortage on the team, you might have to do 2 separate areas. So this is what I mean. Like, there's little things that can tick people off, and then they've got the leverage, HR, to just say, oh, we found another candidate that's better than you, or the manager didn't like you. So this is what I mean about being able to kind of play the character and understand their passive aggressive personality types. I mean, did I need to be more submissive with that manager to give him the impression he's more powerful than me and I can't climb the corporate ladder? This is the type of ridiculousness sometimes you need to deal with. And that's why when you start with day one, the same way they're starting with manipulation and lies and passive aggressiveness on day one, you do the same. And I don't mean you create problems, but you just understand, okay, everything's a game here, everything's a lie, time wasting or lying to me about maybe potential salaries, potential flexibility of the job. Just be aware of that, right?
HR manager can tick all of their boxes. They are normally the ones that get to pick the winner. What they really want to know is, are you going to make them look good? Are you going to make their job easier or harder? Those points are aligned with the interests of the company, but they are not the same. A manager wants someone who is going to work hard, but they would prefer an average worker to an above average worker if the average worker won't cause problems. People get fired all the time for making complaints or undermining their managers, even if the issues they raised were in the best interest of the company. Over your career, keeping a good relationship with your managers and colleagues will be much more valuable than impressing a corporation by going over your boss's head. Future employers are not going to want to speak with the shareholders of your past company. They will want to speak with your old boss. Having a glowing recommendation ticks off a lot of boxes for the HR manager and means a new potential boss can hire you with confidence.
So this is a point, like the 8th point I wanted to make around managers, right? So managers, of course, they want to focus on how you're going to make their job easier, how you're going to make the team work more effectively, you're going to make them look good. Everything's about perception, not reality. And this is what I mean about kind of starting with the lies, right? Because perception matters more than reality in the corporate world. How HR perceive you, how co-workers perceive you. That's why so much about it is about playing that character and reading in between the lines, right? If a manager's asking you certain questions, what are they really implying? What's the underlying reason behind the question? It's not going to be simply just technical questions. It's trying to navigate and feel for who you are and what your personality type is. And this is a key thing why being an average worker is more important than being a hard worker, right? A hard worker who wants to succeed on the basis of their merit, who wants to actually get paid for what they're doing and just focus on the actual work. They don't really want a hard worker. They don't want a competent worker. They want an average worker. They want an average worker, not the best, someone they can easily control and manipulate.
Complaints handling and enforcement is another tool that corporate America has used to systematically dehumanize its employees. The modern human resources department has taken over most workplace complaints handling as one of its main responsibilities. This used to be a job for normal managers or, in serious cases, a union or the authorities, but if all complaints are directed towards HR, it gives the company the advantage of hearing about issues and dealing with them before anybody else. For regular workplace drama, it's a good system. But for more serious problems, you need to remember that human resources works for the company. They do not work for you. Any complaint that will pit you against the company and its shareholders is not the right complaint to take to HR. That would be like getting legal advice from a police officer trying to arrest you. Employees that frequently complain to HR go on the list to be terminated first in the next round of layoffs when they happen. It's rarely worth raising issues with HR, because it annoys your manager if it ever gets back to them, and it annoys the regular people working in a shitty department that have to process the complaints. The same two people that will be responsible for your salary negotiations or internal promotions if you ever pursue that. One rare case when you can use this system to your advantage is a real unethical life pro tip. But if you think you are about to be fired, then making a complaint to HR can make that very hard for the company to do without it looking like a retaliation, which is illegal.
So there we go, right? That's a great kind of little point there. So firstly, it's my final point. Complaints, enforcement, all these type of integrity concerns, internal whistleblowing type of systems that they have at these companies where you can go and kind of log a concern you have about the company. Anonymously, you can do that. You can flag things to HR, employee relations. And a key strategy for you to use is if you think you're going to be fired, you're going to be part of a layoff in the next 6 to 12 months, you can go and flag something to HR or to employee relations, whatever it would be, inefficient process, mistreatment by the manager, things like that. And then if they put you up for a layoff, you can always fight back with a lawsuit or even discussing internally and saying, well, I raised this issue and now you're retaliating by firing me from the company. And that you can look up this term, employee retaliation. You can use that in negotiating tactic, and they might be able to give you more of a larger layoff package, maybe with an additional non-disclosure agreement that you don't take them to court over that instance where you think they're retaliating against you for flagging these issues. I worked in the finance industry for over 10 years, and I offer career advice. There's a link in the description if you want to speak with me directly. And let me know in the comment section some of their mind games that HR have been playing with you. There are 2 recommended videos on the screen right now, and I'll see you next time.